I'm going to start off with talking about some news that I really was a little bit disappointed in. That would be Exodus and their singer, now former singer, Steve Zetro Souza, parting ways. Let me read the press release first before I really get into why I'm disappointed and, where I stand on this whole thing. Let's read their press release. I mean, it was a very brief post. I saw the post about 5 minutes after they put it up, but let's read what they put on their Facebook page. And it reads as follows. Exodus have parted ways with Steve Zetro Souza. We thank Steve for his years fronting the band and all of the killer music we made during that time. We wish him only the best in the future and much success with anything he does. And please help us welcome Rob Dukes back to Exodus. We are beyond stoked to have Rob back, ripping it up on stage with us, and he's looking forward to crushing everything like only he can. Next chapter begins, new record rolls along as planned, and the beatings will continue. See you soon, Exodus. Okay. First of all, my first reaction when seeing that was disappointment. Not because Rob Dukes is coming back to the band, but because Steve Zetro Souza, who in my opinion is the voice of Exodus and adds so much to the uniqueness of the band, is now gone. So, here's the thing. I've been following Exodus for over 30 years. And for me, personally, anything that the band has ever done from 2003 on, like when they made their comeback with Temple of the Damned to the present day, everything they have done has pretty much turned to gold. Like, in the early days, I love Bonded by Blood. And folks, Exodus is my favorite thrash metal band of all time. Just want to kind of throw that out there. If it weren't for Bonded by Blood, this show probably wouldn't exist in the way that it does. But I grew up listening to Steve sing in that band. I've been, I'm older than I look. Pleasures of the Flesh, Fabulous Disaster was the first album that I ever bought by them. Impact is Imminent. I think it's a better album than people give it credit for. Or, I think it's better than what people say it is. And then Force of Habit. Was it an okay record? Yeah, but Impact is Imminent and Force of Habit are obviously the two weakest records. But from 2003 on, Exodus has pretty much kicked ass. And when I think of thrash metal bands, like the old school bands coming back, like the early 2000s, like a lot of these bands started really making records again. The three bands, in my opinion, over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years that have been the most consistent and have put out the best material, I would say it's Exodus, Death Angel, and Overkill. Those three bands have just put out a streak of phenomenal records. Now, I am highly disappointed that Steve is not with the band. I have no problem with Rob Dukes. Rob Dukes did a pretty solid job when he was in the band. A lot of people, if you look at their website and a lot of the comments, and you look at the comments around social media, a lot of people are really not happy about Zetro leaving, but they're not out there utterly protesting Rob Dukes either. I mean, pretty much most people accepted him. But I'm going to tell you what the difference is between the two of them. They're both great frontmen. There's no question about that. Are they competent vocalists? Yes. But the difference between Rob Dukes and Zetro is very simple. Rob Dukes sounds like your everyday, run-of-the-mill, hardcore vocalist. And he does a very good job with that style of singing. Steve Zetro Souza, on the other hand, is far more unique, and Steve singing over the music that Gary writes is one of the most unique things, not only in thrash metal, but in the heavy metal scene in general. And when you take Steve away from that music, it loses some of its uniqueness. It just does. So I'm not saying Rob Dukes is a terrible vocalist. He's not. But the thing is, he doesn't bring anything new or exciting to the band. There are a lot of people that sing a lot like him that you could throw in there, and to me, there wouldn't be that much of a difference. But when Steve came back, there was a huge difference. That uniqueness came back. And that is the biggest difference, and that is why I'm disappointed Steve is not with the band. Now, I get why they bring Rob back. Everybody that's been a fan of Exodus knows who he is. Most people generally accepted him. You know, it's not like you don't have a bunch of people going out and saying, oh my God, no Zetro, no Exodus. Because clearly the main reason most people listen to Exodus, and the main reason I listen to them, is Gary Holt's songwriting. But Steve just added something to that songwriting that Rob Dukes does not. Rob does a good job. The 3 albums he sang on with Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and of course, Shovel-Headed Kill Machine, which all 3 of those records are phenomenal. Exhibit A is probably one of my top 2 Exodus albums. But he's not Steve. And that's really where I'm going with that. I want to tell you a funny Steve Zetro Souza story of when he came on my radio show. So Zetro came on my show for the first time when he formed the band Hatriot. Now, mind you, I grew up listening to this guy, so I was super excited to have this guy on my show. And I can tell you, I've had him on my show a couple times with Hatriot, and then he came on my show a couple times, my radio show, when he rejoined Exodus. And absolutely cool dude. You know, Exodus and Steve, and this applies to Steve too, one of the most fan-friendly metal bands out there. Like, if you're going to pay for a meet and greet, that is the band you want to pay the meet and greet price for, because they are that cool with their fans. You know, you see a genuine appreciation from that band towards their fans. That would go for everybody that's in the band. And Steve was like an ambassador in that sense. But I talked to him, absolutely incredible guy to talk to. Met him once. They came here to Cleveland, you know, about 10 years ago when they were opening for Slayer. You know, Gary was kind of doing double duty. And just an incredible dude. Really cool guy. But I'll tell you a funny story. So the first time I had ever talked to him, when I was doing the radio show, I would ask for a station ID. You know, one of those IDs where you say, "Hey, this is Steve Souza from, you know, Hatriot or Exodus, and you're listening to, you know, yada yada yada." You know, one of those. I forgot to do it. In all honesty, I literally forgot to ask him to do that. So, knowing that I forgot to ask him to do that, I found his page on Facebook actually back then, and I messaged him. I told him the situation. Dude's like, "Call my number." I called him on his cell phone, and he did the station ID for me. He actually set a time for me to call him. He did it. But the fact that the guy took time out of his day for somebody he really doesn't know that well to do something like that was easily one of the coolest things somebody has ever done on my show. Like, I know if I were to ask like 90% of the musicians out there that I've ever interviewed, most of them would, you know, they would probably say no. But Steve was cool. He said yes. You know, he called me. He actually ended up calling me back. I gave him my cell phone number. Really cool dude. Just a guy that was a great frontman. And to me, one of my top 2 or 3 frontman in Exodus. And that's the thing. You can't really replace him. Like, if Rob Dukes left Exodus and they weren't going to get Zetro back, you can get a lot of guys that sound like Rob and put them in that position. But you really can't duplicate Zetro. You just can't. You know, the closest thing you could probably do is his son Cody, who sings in Hatriot. Sounds a lot like Steve. You could probably put him maybe in that category. He sounds similar. Some people have always said that Zetro sounds similar to Blitz from Overkill. They kind of got a somewhat similar voice, but not really. Zetro is just that unique. And Zetro, with Gary's awesome songwriting, is what I am going to miss from the band. Now, am I excited for the next Exodus album? Absolutely. It's Gary Holt, folks. I mean, the guy is a phenomenal guitar player and just writes, again, my favorite thrash band of all time. There's a reason for that. Gary is my biggest reason why I listen to Exodus. But here's the difference. When I listen to an album like Exhibit A or Exhibit B or Shovel-Headed Kill Machine, all three of which are brilliant records, I'm listening to that for Gary's awesome songwriting. Rob's vocals are okay. They're good. But when I listened to Exodus with Steve Zetro Souza in the band, I listened to those records to hear Gary and his songwriting and Steve's vocals on top of that songwriting. Because that combination is as I said before, one of the most unique things in thrash metal and in the heavy metal scene itself. So I think Exodus loses a little bit without Steve. I'm good with Rob, and it makes sense too. You bring the guy back that you know. You bring a guy back that pretty much most of the fans accept. And then you don't have to get to know a new vocalist. You don't have to break somebody in. You don't have somebody nobody's ever heard of. And then you don't have to listen to these questions of why, like, who is this guy? What does he sound like? You don't have to listen to that. We already know what Rob sounds like. So, in a sense, if you're going to replace Steve, I'm glad they picked him. And again, it's not a slight at Rob Dukes. I mean, a guy's a good frontman. I've seen them live with him. He's just not a unique vocalist compared to Steve. And that's really mainly what I'm saying. Now, a lot of people are speculating, what happened? Why did they part ways? Folks, I can tell you that anytime something happens behind the scenes, you're just going to get a generic press release. Nobody will ever give you the full story. Most of us weren't there. I mean, I'm sure there are people that know what happened, but again, we could sit here and speculate for hours. But the bottom line is, as somebody like myself who has witnessed members parting ways with bands firing people, people leaving a band, you'll never get the full story, folks. And in many cases, not all, a lot of times these parting of the ways are amicable. But if they are not amicable, and again, I know nothing about what happened with their situation, but if the situation isn't amicable, most likely you don't want to know the story because you would be highly disappointed in your heroes. You know that old adage where they say, you don't want to meet your heroes, you'll be disappointed. In a lot of cases, you would be if you knew the real story of what happened behind the scenes in pretty much almost every band you listen to. Now, it doesn't apply to everybody. And certainly, I have no idea what happened in this situation. There's so many things that could have happened. But the bottom line is, Steve isn't there. I'm disappointed. So are a lot of people. Actually, a majority of people are disappointed with it. But that same majority of people, I would say pretty much almost all of them, are okay with Rob. Because we've heard Rob before. We liked the albums he sang on. And it's really not going to affect the quality of the album, in my opinion. Again, Atrocity Exhibition, Exhibit A, Atrocity Exhibition, that is probably, it's pretty close to my favorite Exodus album. It's tough. It's between that and Tempo of the Damned. And again, everything that, in my opinion, that Exodus has done since 2003 has been phenomenal. Persona non grata was a great record. It's probably in my top 3, maybe 4. And when I say everything from 2003 on is the best stuff they've ever done, Rob sang on 3 of those albums. So that's where I stand. Disappointed there's no Steve Zetro Souza in Exodus. Hopefully, maybe he might join another project or another band, maybe. Who knows? You know, if he were to bow out and stop doing music altogether, he's made his mark. But to be honest, I'm going to miss him in that band. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.